The year was 1943, and the war had already drained the strength of Europe. Across the Atlantic, ships laden with gray-faced men crossed waters guarded by destroyers and aircraft. These were not free men, they were Wehrmacht prisoners, captured in North Africa and shipped thousands of miles away to the United States. For many, this was the first time they had ever left Europe. They expected to see enemies waiting with clenched fists and angry faces, a land full of deprivation masked by propaganda. Instead, when the hatches opened in New York and Boston harbors, the first sound they heard was laughter from dock workers and the rolling rhythm of jazz leaking from radios. The march from the docks to the trains was not accompanied by jeering crowds, but by curiosity. American children pointed, whispering to their parents. Some even waved. The prisoners, still in dusty Africa Corps uniforms, shifted uneasily. A corporal named Ernst Heinemann wrote in his diary that night, "They did not throw stones. They smiled. It is stranger than any battle." From the crowded trains, the view outside the window told a story that no German officer had prepared them for. Fields stretched for miles without fences, punctuated by barns so large they resembled factories, passing through Pennsylvania, Ohio, and the plains of Illinois. The prisoners whispered among themselves, how could so much land belong to ordinary farmers back home? Even barons ruled smaller estates. Every few miles, the trains stopped to load supplies, crates of oranges, barrels of milk, stacks of bread. These were not luxuries reserved for officers, but food waiting at small-town stations. POW Hans Richter remembered a single thought repeating in his head, if this is what they feed their civilians, what will they give their soldiers? At night, as the trains cut through cities, the men pressed their faces to the glass in Berlin and Hamburg. Blackout curtains made streets silent and dark. But here, neon lights glowed over diners and cinemas, visible even from the tracks. Entire neighborhoods shone as though the war did not exist. One lieutenant muttered under his breath, "This is a trick. No nation at war wastes electricity like this." But no one answered him. By late 1943, more than 400 prisoner-of-war camps had been prepared across the United States. The largest were in Texas, Oklahoma, and the Midwest, where farmland needed hands and wide space could contain thousands. The Germans were marched under watchtowers, their boots crunching on gravel, still expecting harsh treatment. Yet the barracks had clean bunks, blankets, and wooden floors. The guards were young men themselves, often no older than the prisoners. Many smiled, offering cigarettes or chewing gum to men who had endured sandstorms in North Africa. The air of Texas felt like another world, hot, heavy, but fertile, carrying the smell of corn and hay instead of dust. A soldier named Carl Weber, who had been captured near Tunis, whispered to his bunkmate on that first night, "They want to weaken us with comfort. They must. No enemy feeds a prisoner well." But when the morning came, he found the truth harder to dismiss. The breakfast line stretched through the mess hall, and each man carried a metal tray. Steam rose from vats of scrambled eggs, sausages, oatmeal, and bread beside them. A pot of something thick and brown puzzled the Germans. The cooks called it peanut butter, spreading it over bread with effortless familiarity. Most prisoners avoided it that first day, suspicious of its strange texture, but even without it, the sheer volume of food was shocking. According to quartermaster records, the average POW ration in the United States in 1943 contained over 3,000 calories per day, more than the daily intake of many German civilians in Berlin at the same time. One prisoner wrote home, "We are treated better than our own soldiers on the front. Tell me, how is this possible?" The contradiction cut deep. For years, propaganda had painted Americans as weak, disorganized, barely capable of fighting a war without British or Soviet aid. Yet here, the evidence stood on their plates, undeniable, steaming in the morning air. And still, the strangest discovery, the taste of peanut butter was yet to come. The mess hall in Camp Hearn, Texas, smelled of coffee, fried bacon, and freshly baked bread, for men who had endured the desert heat of North Africa and the bitter scarcity of Europe. The aroma was dizzying. Rows of Wehrmacht prisoners filed in, trays clattering in their hands, eyes darting across vats of food that seemed more like a celebration than a ration line. On one corner table stood a large metal tub filled with a substance they had never seen, thick, golden brown, almost clay-like. It clung to spoons and spread reluctantly over white bread. An American cook scooped a dollop onto trays with a grin. "Peanut butter," he announced, as though everyone in the world must know the name. The Germans exchanged puzzled glances. Ernst Heinemann, the corporal who had written about the children waving in New York, stared at the strange paste. He pressed it to his lips, chewed, and felt the oily sweetness coat his mouth. His face twisted. "Es klebt an den Zähnen." He muttered, "It sticks to the teeth." The men around him laughed nervously, unsure if this was food or some American joke. In Berlin, peanut butter was unheard of. Nuts were rare, sugar scarcer still, and oil was a luxury consumed by officers or industrialists. Here, prisoners were offered a spread so rich it seemed decadent. Karl Weber, still convinced this was some kind of test, pushed it aside and filled his tray with eggs and sausage. But younger soldiers, curious and hungry, returned for second spoonfuls. Hans Richter scribbled a quick line into his notebook that night. "It tastes like nothing we have. Sweet, salty, heavy. The Americans eat this every day. If this is their poverty, what is their wealth?" The question lingered longer than the taste itself. The statistics only deepened their unease. According to quartermaster records, in 1943, the United States produced more than 200 million pounds of peanut butter. Every schoolchild's lunchbox might contain it. The number staggered men who had grown used to measuring food in ounces, scraping the bottom of ration tins, and trading cigarettes for a slice of bread. One lieutenant, a veteran of the Eastern Front, held up his slice smeared thickly with the paste and asked the men at his table, "If they give this to us, they're prisoners. What do their soldiers eat at the front? What chance do we have if even their children dine like kings?" The silence afterward was heavier than any speech. By the third day, some men had grown fond of it, eating it greedily, while others swore it made them sick. But the effect went far beyond taste. To the POWs, peanut butter became a symbol of the alien culture they had stepped into, a simple food that embodied scale, excess, and strangeness. Letters home carried the bewilderment across the ocean. One prisoner wrote to his wife, "Today they gave us a paste made from nuts. I cannot explain it, only that it is spread thick like butter, but tastes sweet and rich. It is their habit, their custom, something we could never imagine in Germany." Every spoonful was a reminder that the world they had fought to conquer was bigger, stranger, and far more abundant than anything their leaders had described. Some men licked their fingers, laughing at the stickiness. Others spat discreetly into napkins, but whether loved or hated, the first taste of peanut butter stayed with them. It was no longer just about food, it was about scale, about difference, about a system so powerful it could waste calories on prisoners while Europe starved. If a spoonful of peanut butter could cause such confusion, what would they think when they saw the scale of American farms and factories? The morning after their first encounter with peanut butter, the prisoners filed back into the mess hall, half expecting the indulgence to be a mistake. Surely, they thought, no nation could sustain such rations for enemies. Yet the tables groaned under the weight of more food than most of them had seen in months: scrambled eggs, oatmeal sweetened with sugar, sausage links glistening with fat, and pitchers of fresh milk cold enough to fog the glass. For men who had survived on watery soup and hard bread in the Reich, the abundance was unsettling. One prisoner, Otto Klein, later wrote, "It was as though each morning was Christmas. I could not reconcile it with the news of shortages we heard before capture. Quartermaster records reveal a stark reality. The average German civilian ration in 1943 provided roughly 1,500 calories a day, barely enough to sustain heavy labor. By contrast, even POWs in the United States were allocated over 3,000 calories daily, nearly double, eggs alone, shipped in refrigerated rail cars from the Midwest, arrived by the millions each week. For some, the statistics were unbearable. Sergeant Karl Weber counted every slice of bread on his tray, whispering that this single breakfast surpassed what his family in Hamburg received in 3 days, when a guard casually remarked that American soldiers overseas received more than the prisoners. Weber stared blankly, unable to answer. Lunch brought new shocks: beef stew thick with potatoes, bread with butter, apples piled high in bowls. The fruit alone seemed unreal. In wartime Europe, apples were rare luxuries, yet here they rolled freely from crates as if no one cared if they bruised. Grapefruits appeared one afternoon, their tart scent filling the air. Few prisoners had ever seen one before. At dinner, pitchers of milk were placed on every table. The prisoners laughed nervously, asking if they were meant for children. But the guards shrugged. Milk was simply part of the diet. To Germans accustomed to shortages, it was as though they had stumbled into a fairy tale. Not all accepted it easily. Ernst Heinemann, who had first recorded the smiles of American children, admitted in his diary, "I cannot eat without thinking of my wife queuing for bread. Every bite is guilt." Yet others leaned into the abundance, pocketing rolls and apples to save for later. Hans Richter described the inner conflict most clearly. If they can feed us like this, then perhaps what we were told about America is wrong. But if what we were told is wrong, then what else is untrue? The food was no longer just sustenance. It was a weapon more powerful than propaganda. By the end of the first month, prisoners had grown accustomed to eating more than they ever had before, yet routine did not dull the shock. Each new dish, roast turkey at Thanksgiving, pumpkin pie in December, pulled them further from the world they had believed in. If the enemy could feed captives like kings, what would they discover about the land itself? The farms that produced such endless supplies? By 1944, many German prisoners had been sent beyond the barbed wire to work under supervision in Texas, Oklahoma, and Iowa. They were loaded onto trucks each morning and driven past horizons of farmland that stretched farther than any soldier could see. The scale was disorienting. Where in Germany a farm might cover 30 or 40 acres, here single families cultivated hundreds, sometimes thousands. Karl Weber, the skeptical sergeant, counted the furrows one afternoon as they rode past. A local farmer explained that his land exceeded 1,000 acres, larger than some entire German villages. Weber whispered, "In Germany, this man would be called a baron. Here, he is only a farmer." The prisoners were put to work baling hay, repairing fences, and picking fruit. But it wasn't the labor that stunned them, it was the machines. Tractors roared across the fields with steel wheels taller than a man, pulling reapers that harvested grain at a speed no horse could match. In one Iowa county alone, records showed more than 2,500 tractors in operation by 1944. Germany, strangled by fuel shortages and bombings, could not maintain even a fraction of that capacity for the POWs. It was as though the land itself was mechanized, feeding not only the United States, but its allies overseas. Hans Richter scrawled a line into his notebook: "One American farm feeds more soldiers than an entire province of Germany. How can we fight against land itself on rare occasions?" Prisoners glimpsed the factories that consumed the harvests. Rail lines rumbled with endless trains, grain cars, cattle cars, refrigerated cars bound for distant cities. A guard boasted to the prisoners that one plant in Chicago processed 10,000 hogs a day. The number was absurd, but the next trainload of meat seemed to prove it. Later, working near Houston, they saw shipyards where Liberty ships took shape in weeks, not months. The clang of hammers and the arc of welding torches illuminated the night sky. In 1943 alone, American yards launched more than 700 ships. To German eyes, it was not industry, it was sorcery. For years, they had been told that the Reich stood as a fortress of discipline and order, while America was decadent and chaotic. Yet here was order greater than anything they had seen. Every field harvested on time, every train punctual, every factory alive with rhythm. Ernst Heinemann confessed to his diary, "We believed their chaos was our advantage. Now I see that their chaos is wealth. Even mistakes produce more than our triumphs." One evening, after a long day of hauling sacks of corn, the prisoners rested by a barn. A farmer's son, no older than 12, pulled up in a truck almost larger than a Berlin apartment. He leaned out and asked, "You boys need water." The prisoners drank in silence. When the boy drove off, Weber muttered, "If their children command such machines, then what can their armies command?" The question hung in the twilight, unanswered. The farm lights flickered on one by one, bright against the darkening sky lamps that would have been forbidden in blackout Germany. And the prisoners realized they had not yet seen the full extent of this new world. If farms and factories revealed such staggering scale, what revelations would come when they confronted the people themselves, the guards, the children, the civilians whose humanity contradicted every lesson drilled into them? By the summer of 1944, the prisoners had grown used to the rhythms of American life: wake at dawn, work under the sun, return behind the wire by dusk. Yet it was not only the scale of farms and factories that gnawed at them. It was the people. Every day, small encounters chipped away at the fortress of ideology built inside them. On labor details, farmers' wives left jugs of iced tea and baskets of sandwiches. Some guards, barely older than the prisoners themselves, handed out cigarettes as if they were meaningless scraps. Children waved from bicycles as trucks carrying POWs rumbled down country roads. Each smile contradicted the image of Americans as corrupt and hostile. Hans Richter noted in his diary, "I expected hatred. I found kindness. Even their children greet us with curiosity, not scorn. This is the most disarming weapon they have." At Camp Tonkawa in Oklahoma, a young American guard named Private Miller became a curiosity among the Germans. He always chewed gum, snapping it noisily. And one day he passed a stick to a prisoner. The German unwrapped it carefully, tasting the minty sweetness, and frowned, unsure whether to swallow it or spit it out. Miller laughed and explained through gestures that it was meant to be chewed endlessly. Soon the camp was filled with Germans chewing awkwardly, passing around sticks of gum like relics. To them, the act symbolized both luxury and strangeness. Ernst Heinemann wrote, "It is frivolous, wasteful, and yet it brings pleasure. They live in a world where even their mouths are never empty." Not all encounters were orchestrated by guards. In Texas, children sometimes gathered near the fences, curious about the men inside. They tossed baseballs, paper notes, even small candies through the wire. The prisoners, moved by the innocence, responded with sketches of birds, carved trinkets from wood, or songs sung softly in the evening air. One boy later told his father, "They look like us, only in different clothes." That simple sentence, passed back through gossip, reached the ears of the prisoners and weighed heavier than any interrogation. The letters written home revealed the fracture lines spreading inside them. A lieutenant confessed to his wife, "They treat us better than we would treat them. Do not believe the newspapers when they say Americans are weak. They are strong in ways we never imagined." Another soldier, cautious not to sound disloyal, hinted, "There is more here than I can write. If you could see how they live, you would not recognize the enemy they describe in Germany." Each line was a quiet rebellion, a betrayal of the certainty they had carried into captivity. For some, the kindness was unbearable, more confusing than cruelty. Karl Weber, who had clung longest to skepticism, muttered one night, "If they hate us, I can fight them. But if they treat us like men, what weapons remain?" The question spread like a whisper in the barracks, and with it came an even greater unease if their enemy's humanity was real. Then perhaps their leaders had lied not only about America, but about everything. What would happen when even symbols of ideology, uniforms, salutes, loyalty itself began to collapse under the weight of peanut butter, chewing gum, and children's smiles? By late 1944, the contradictions had become impossible to ignore. What began with a strange paste called peanut butter had evolved into something far deeper, a gnawing doubt that corroded the foundations of belief. The prisoners still wore their field gray uniforms, still sang the old marching songs, but their voices carried less conviction. Letters, censored but not silenced, revealed the shift. Hans Richter admitted to his brother here, "I have eaten more meat in 6 months than in the last 3 years at home. If America can afford this for prisoners, then everything we were told about their weakness was false." The taste of peanut butter, once a curiosity, now symbolized the collapse of certainty. It was more than food, it was proof of abundance, of a system that thrived while Europe starved. The statistics circled in their minds. American factories had built 96,000 planes in 1944 alone, more than Germany could dream of producing. Farms yielded wheat by the billion bushels. Trains carried endless supplies across 2 oceans. Karl Weber, once the skeptic, finally broke one evening in the barracks. "We have fought for a lie," he whispered. "If they can feed their prisoners like this and still build armies greater than ours, then the Reich is already lost." Silence followed, heavy. Dangerous silence, but no one contradicted him. Some prisoners clung desperately to loyalty, but others began to see their captors not as enemies, but as examples. Ernst Heinemann, who had once written about guilt with every bite, now noted. Perhaps freedom lies not in victory, but in admitting what is true. When American guards offered English lessons, many volunteered. Others joined camp orchestras, using instruments provided by their captors. Music filled the evenings. And for a moment, the war felt distant. Ideology, which had once defined them, now seemed fragile compared to the taste of milk, the hum of electricity, the glow of a cinema light flickering in town. Peanut butter remained at the center of their bewilderment, spread thickly on bread, sticking to the roof of the mouth. It became a joke among the men, yet also a symbol they returned to again and again. It represented the strangeness of America, the abundance that defied belief, and the comfort that undermined hatred. Hans Richter wrote in one of his last wartime diary entries, "The Führer spoke of iron and blood. But here, the power lies in butter, bread, and strange nut paste." If a people can live like this while fighting a world war, then perhaps the future belongs to them, not to us. By the time Germany itself collapsed in 1945, many prisoners no longer wondered whether the Reich would endure, but how they themselves would live after captivity. Some dreamed of carrying these lessons home about abundance, democracy, and even peanut butter. Others feared what awaited them when they returned to ruins. The ideology that had once bound them now lay in fragments. And the first crack, the one they never forgot, was the taste of something simple, sticky, and American.